Kael had never imagined that one decision would change his life forever. He had been a soldier for as long as he could remember, fighting in wars that never seemed to end. He'd always followed orders, always done what was asked of him, because that's what soldiers did. It wasn't about questioning. It was about surviving. It was about the mission. But everything changed the day he saw her die. It wasn't a battle, not in the traditional sense. It happened in the middle of an ordinary military operation, one of those missions where nothing seemed special. But Kael had been assigned to guard a group of alien prisoners that day. Among them was an alien girl, no older than him, with dark eyes that seemed to look right through him. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't like the typical prisoner he had encountered on the battlefield. There was something different about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. The orders were clear. Keep them locked up, make sure they didn't escape. It was a simple task, and Kael had seen many prisoners before. Most of them were rebellious, fearful, but they didn't matter. They were just part of the war, a casualty of the galaxy's endless conflict. But this alien girl, her eyes told a different story. They told a story of desperation, of survival, of a life that had been stolen. Kael stood by, doing his duty, but something in him couldn't ignore her. He saw the way she looked at him, like she was pleading for something he couldn't understand. She wasn't begging for freedom. She wasn't begging for mercy. She was begging for something he hadn't given a second thought to: her humanity. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. He didn't know why, but he couldn't let her stay locked in that cage. He didn't care about the orders anymore. The war didn't matter. This girl mattered. Kael made a decision, one that would cost him everything. He freed her. Without thinking, without hesitation, he unlocked the cage and let her go. He didn't know what he expected to happen next. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't think about the consequences. All he could think about was that she was free, even if it meant sacrificing his own future. She ran the moment she was free. Without a word, without looking back, she ran into the chaos of the war-torn world around them. Kael didn't follow her. He didn't even try to stop her. He had done what he thought was right. For once, he had acted on something deeper than the training and the commands. Within minutes, the consequences of his actions came crashing down. He was dragged before his superiors, his entire career disintegrating in front of him. Kael had broken the rules, betrayed his orders, and freed an enemy prisoner. The military didn't care about his reasons. They didn't care that he had acted out of compassion. All they saw was a traitor. His life, his position, everything he had built gone. In a flash, they expelled him from the army and branded him a deserter. He had nothing left. But as Kael walked away from everything he knew, as the doors to his old life closed behind him, one thought kept him going. The alien girl. He had freed her. And that was something he would never regret. Days passed, and Kael wandered aimlessly, lost and without purpose. He had no home, no allies, and no plan. He was just another man thrown into a galaxy at war. But then, when Kael had almost given up hope, she found him. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing there, waiting for him. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice soft but clear. Kael blinked in surprise. "For what?" "I got you thrown out of the army. I got everything I worked for taken from me." Her eyes met his with a steady gaze. "You saved me," she said again. "That's more than enough." Her name was Lyra, and Kael quickly realized that everything he had known, everything he had believed, was about to change. Lyra wasn't just an alien. She wasn't just a prisoner, or a casualty of the war. She was something more, something he couldn't quite explain. And for the first time in his life, Kael didn't feel alone. In her eyes he saw the same longing for something better, for something more than survival. They didn't speak much in the days that followed. Kael didn't know what to say to her. He had freed her, but now they were both lost, drifting in a galaxy full of chaos and war. But there was something in The silence between them, a bond forming, stronger than anything Kael had ever felt before. That it wasn't long before Lyra revealed the truth. She was part of a resistance. She wasn't just a helpless prisoner. She was fighting for the future of her people, a future that the war had stolen. She had seen something in Kael when he saved her, something she thought was rare. Compassion, hope. She believed he could be more than just a soldier. She believed he could be the key to defeating the enemies that threatened their galaxy. Kael didn't understand it at first. He didn't see himself as a leader, didn't see himself as anything more than a man who had thrown away everything for the sake of someone else. But when Lyra looked at him, when she smiled softly and said, "You're not just a soldier anymore," Kael began to wonder. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was more to life than just surviving. Maybe it was time to fight for something worth living for. And as they began their journey together, Kael knew one thing for sure. Lyra wasn't just an alien girl anymore. She had become the love of his life, but their battle was only beginning. Kael had always thought of himself as a soldier, someone who followed orders without question. He had spent his entire life living by the strict codes of the military, believing that his duty was to protect and fight for his side, no matter what. But after he had freed Lyra, after everything had fallen apart, he found himself questioning everything he had ever believed in. What was he really fighting for? Was it just a series of battles, a never-ending cycle of destruction, or was there something more? And what if the war he had fought in all these years wasn't the one that truly mattered? Lyra was the answer. When she had found him again, after he had been cast out from the army, Kael was lost. But Lyra had brought him back, not just physically but emotionally. She was part of something bigger, something Kael hadn't realized could even exist, a resistance. Her people were fighting to stop the galaxy from falling into the hands of forces that wanted to control everything. And when Lyra had looked at Kael with those intense, hopeful eyes, he realized he had a choice to make. He could continue living in the wreckage of his past, or he could fight alongside her, against something more dangerous than any enemy he had ever faced. The Enshrouded. They had begun their journey together. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about fighting for something worth saving. Kael didn't know if he could ever fully understand Lyra's world, but he was willing to try. And for the first time in a long while, Kael felt like he had a purpose again. The resistance wasn't an army. It wasn't just soldiers. It was people who had been through the worst, who had seen the destruction, the corruption, the manipulation of the galaxy, and still chose to fight for something better. They were a group of misfits, a scattered collection of species, each with their own history and reasons for joining the cause. But there was one thing that bound them together: hope. Lyra had explained it to Kael one evening as they sat around the fire, surrounded by the stars. Hope is the most dangerous weapon we have. The Enshrouded want us to be afraid. They want us to give up, but we won't. Kael had looked at her, puzzled. But how? The Enshrouded control everything. Every faction, every leader, they're all under their influence. Lyra's eyes had hardened, her jaw set. That's what they want us to believe. But the truth is, the Enshrouded can't control everything. Not if we unite. Not if we show them that we're stronger than they ever thought we could be. Kael had never understood the power of unity before, not really. He had always seen war as something inevitable, a force that swept everyone up and pushed them forward with no way to fight against it. But Lyra's words stirred something inside him. She believed in something he hadn't dared to dream about: a future where the galaxy didn't have to be divided, where people didn't have to fight just to survive. In the days that followed, Kael trained alongside the resistance, learning new tactics, new ways of fighting. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that could bring real change. His skill in combat, his ability to adapt, had made him an asset to the group. But it wasn't just his fighting ability that mattered, it was his heart. The others could see it too. Kael wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for them. The Resistance's base was hidden, deep within a remote asteroid field, away from the prying eyes of the Enshrouded. It wasn't much a few small ships, a few structures made of scrap metal and salvage tech, but it was enough. The group had its own resources, its own plans, and most importantly, its own will to fight. They didn't have the firepower of the galaxy's factions, but they had something the Enshrouded didn't: unity. As Kael got to know the other members of the Resistance, he learned that many had lost everything, just like him. There were humans, aliens, and other races, each of them with their own scars from the war. But despite their differences, they all had the same goal: to stop the Enshrouded from taking over the galaxy. Some wanted revenge, others just wanted peace, but in the end, they all wanted the same thing: freedom. One of the Resistance leaders, a HFY named Thalrak, had pulled Kael aside one evening, his voice low and measured. "You're one of us now, Kael, but know this: the road ahead won't be easy. The Enshrouded won't let us take this from them. They'll fight back with everything they have. And when they do, we'll have to be ready." Kael nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a fight to win. It was a fight for survival. The Enshrouded were everywhere, manipulating leaders, dividing factions, spreading their influence through fear and deception. Kael couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not when Lyra had given him a purpose again. The next few days were filled with preparation. The Resistance was planning a strike against one of the Enshrouded's key supply routes, a critical part of their operations. It wasn't the biggest mission they had, but it was a step in the right direction. They couldn't take down the Enshrouded all at once, but they could start by chipping away at their strength, one battle at a time. Kael felt a sense of determination he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the future, for Lyra, and for all of them. Kael's first mission with the Resistance was about to begin. The Enshrouded supply route, a critical supply line for their operations, had been identified. This wasn't just any mission. It wasn't about defeating the Enshrouded in one fell swoop. It was about sending a message, a signal to the galaxy that the Resistance was alive, that there was hope. And that message was one Kael felt deep within himself. Lyra had briefed him on everything he needed to know. The Enshrouded were highly secretive, but they had left behind telltale signs of their operations. The supply route they were targeting ran through an asteroid belt, a place where ships had to be careful not to get caught in the gravitational pull of the larger asteroids. It was a perfect place for an ambush. "We'll hit them hard and fast," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "We've got a small window before the Enshrouded can bring reinforcements. We can't afford to waste it." Kael nodded. The plan was straightforward. The Resistance would send a small strike team to intercept the Enshrouded supply convoy, destroy their cargo, and disable their ships. They'd do all of this before the enemy could get their bearings and send reinforcements. It was a small operation, but it had to be successful. If they could show the Enshrouded that they weren't untouchable, that the Resistance could strike back, it would inspire more factions to join their cause. The ship's engines hummed beneath Kael as he stood beside Lyra, watching the stars pass by outside. The Resistance's ship was small and quick, designed for these kinds of covert operations. The crew was a mix of experienced soldiers and civilians, people who had lost everything and had nowhere else to turn. But they had one thing that the Enshrouded didn't have: each other. As they neared the asteroid belt, Kael couldn't help but think about everything that had led him to this point. He had been a soldier, a part of a vast military machine that saw people as tools, as assets in an endless war. But now he was fighting for something different. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for people like Lyra, who had given him hope when he had none left. She had shown him that fighting for the future was worth the risk. Lyra's voice interrupted his thoughts. Kael, you're with me. We'll take out the lead ship. The rest of the team will handle the cargo ships. Stay focused. We can't afford to slip up. Kael snapped back to the present, meeting her gaze. She was always calm, always composed. She had the kind of leadership that Kael admired, quiet but powerful. I'm with you, he said, his voice steady. The ship jolted as they entered the asteroid belt. The thick space dust and floating debris made visibility difficult, but Kael's eyes were fixed on the task at hand. The convoy was ahead 3 large cargo ships, escorted by 2 smaller enshrouded vessels. They were just as Lyra had said. This was the perfect opportunity. Without warning, the resistance ship dropped out of warp, directly in front of the convoy, blocking their path. The enshrouded ships were taken by surprise, unable to react quickly enough to defend themselves. Kael could hear the whine of the weapons charging, the ship's defense system locking onto the targets. Fire! Lyra ordered the first blast. Hit one of the smaller escort ships, disabling its engines and sending it drifting off course. The second blast took out the lead ship, a massive cargo vessel, tearing into its hull with devastating force. The convoy was in chaos. The cargo ships began to scatter, trying to escape, but they couldn't outrun the Resistance's strike team. Kael's heart raced as the battle unfolded before him. The Enshrouded were strong, but they were disorganized. The Resistance was faster, more agile, and more determined. Follow me, Lyra shouted as she guided their ship toward the remaining cargo vessels. The rest of the Resistance team engaged, taking out the other Enshrouded ships one by one. Kael's pulse quickened as he focused on the lead cargo ship. It was making a run for it, trying to escape into the asteroid field, but it wasn't going to make it. Lock onto their engines, Kael said to the pilot. We can't let them escape. A loud explosion filled the air as their weapons blasted. The engines of the fleeing ship. It shuddered and slowed to a stop. The cargo ships were now completely disabled, and the Enshrouded supply route had been cut off. Kael couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. This wasn't just a victory, it was a message. A message that the Resistance could fight back. A message that they weren't afraid. The mission was a success. As the smoke cleared and the remnants of the Enshrouded ships floated in the asteroid belt, Kael turned to Lyra. Her expression was one of calm satisfaction, but Kael could see the pride in her eyes. We did it, he said, a grin forming on his face. We did, Lyra replied softly. But this is just the beginning. Kael's mind raced as the crew began to work on securing the captured cargo and preparing for the next phase of the mission. This was just the first strike in a long war. They had made their mark today, but the Enshrouded weren't going to give up so easily. The battle was far from over. As Kael looked at Lyra, he realized that they weren't just fighting for a victory. They were fighting for hope, for a future where peace was possible. It was a war that would cost them everything. But Kael was ready. With Lyra by his side, he knew they could face whatever came next. The aftermath of the attack left Kael feeling both accomplished and conflicted. The strike against the Enshrouded supply line had been a success, yes, but the victory didn't come without its price. They had sent a message to the galaxy, but Kael couldn't shake the feeling that they had made their enemies aware of just how much they were capable of. The Enshrouded were watching, and if the Resistance was going to survive, they would have to move faster and hit harder. In the days following the successful raid, the Resistance base buzzed with activity. Kael had been assigned to work closely with Lyra and the command team to assess the damage they had done to the Enshrouded's operations. They had destroyed vital supplies, crippled a key supply route, and made sure the Enshrouded knew they were capable of a full-scale attack. Kael, Lyra said, as they reviewed the mission's intel together in the makeshift operations room, this is a step in the right direction. But we need to be careful. We've riled them up. They won't wait long before they try to retaliate. Kael looked at her, the fire in her eyes reminding him of the reasons they were doing this. He had seen the darkness in the galaxy, felt the weight of hopelessness pressing down on everyone, but Lyra had given him a new perspective. She believed that unity could prevail. And Kael, for the first time in years, was beginning to believe in that hope. "I know," Kael replied, running his hand through his short-cropped hair. "But at least we're giving them something to fear. For once the galaxy isn't just." Sitting back while the Enshrouded gets stronger, Lyra nodded. "Exactly, but now we need to take it to the next level. The Enshrouded's power lies in their influence, not just their military might. We need to target their leaders, disrupt their networks." Kael glanced at the map on the screen, his eyes narrowing. They had been working on intelligence gathered from their attack, and one name kept appearing over and over. A leader within the Enshrouded's ranks who had orchestrated much of their control over the galaxy. His name was Malachar, and from what Kael had read, he was ruthless, calculating, manipulative, and most dangerously connected to the highest echelons of power across the galaxy. Taking him down would be a game-changer, but it wouldn't be easy. "Malachar," Kael said, almost to himself. "If we can take him out, it will shake the Enshrouded to their core." Lyra turned to him, her expression intense. "That's exactly why they'll have him heavily guarded. We can't make this a direct assault, we'll need a covert operation. And we'll need all the help we can get." Kael agreed. The resistance had become more than just a group of individuals. It was a force that could challenge the Enshrouded. But attacking someone as influential as Malachar would require trust. Trust that Kael wasn't sure everyone was ready to give. Days turned into weeks as Kael and Lyra worked tirelessly, gathering intel and assembling a team for the mission. But despite their preparations, Kael couldn't ignore the nagging feeling. At the back of his mind, they were making themselves known. Every attack, every success, brought the Enshrouded closer to discovering them. And once they did, the retaliation would be merciless. One evening, while reviewing a list of potential allies, Kael was interrupted by a voice he hadn't expected. "Kael," said a familiar voice. He turned to see Thalrak, the Xiekal leader, standing at the doorway. The tall, imposing figure of the Xiekal warrior had become a key ally in their fight. But Kael had learned over the past few weeks that trust with the Xiekal wasn't something given freely. "What's going on?" Kael asked, standing up. He had grown accustomed to Thalrak's stoic presence, but tonight there was something in the Xiekal leader's eyes that Kael couldn't quite read. Thalrak stepped forward, his deep voice resonating in the room. "I've been thinking about our position. The Xiekal are with you, Kael, but there is something we need to discuss. Our people are warriors, and while we fight alongside the resistance, I fear our loyalty might be in question." Kael frowned, his pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" "The Enshrouded are not fools," Thalrak said, his gaze unwavering. "They know we are united with you, and I'm afraid they may be waiting for the right moment to strike back. I've seen the way some of our warriors look at the mission. They're worried, not about the fight, but about trusting the human." Kael's chest tightened. He had earned the Xikal's respect in battle, but this was different. It wasn't just about the Enshrouded anymore, it was about his own people, the ones who had chosen to follow him despite the risks. "We can't afford to doubt each other now," Kael said, his voice firm. "If the Xiekal are with us, then we fight together. No more doubts." Thalrak nodded slowly. "I agree, but the fight is changing. We have to be prepared for what comes next." Kael knew that Thalrak was right. This wasn't just about attacking the Enshrouded anymore. It was about holding the alliance together. They had made enemies of the most powerful force in the galaxy, and the road ahead would be dangerous. But Kael was ready. If it meant proving his loyalty, proving that humanity could stand alongside the greatest warriors in the galaxy, then he would fight with everything he had. That night, As Kael prepared for the next mission, he looked out over the dark expanse of space, his mind racing with the decisions that lay ahead. The resistance had made strides, but the stakes were growing higher. Malachor wasn't just an enemy, they were fighting against an entire system that had ruled the galaxy through fear. And Kael had made a promise to Lyra and to himself. They wouldn't stop until they took that system down. The days following Kael's conversation with Thalrak were filled with preparation. The Jai-Shal's loyalty had been questioned, and that weighed heavily on Kael's mind. The last thing he wanted was to lose the trust of the most formidable faction in the galaxy. But they had no choice. The Enshrouded had already taken too much, and the galaxy couldn't afford another day of division. Kael knew the mission to take down Malachor wouldn't just be about defeating a single leader. It would send a powerful message to the galaxy, a message of hope that even the most insidious and powerful enemies could be brought to their knees. The stakes were higher than ever, and Kael's resolve was stronger than ever before. "We'll need to move fast," Lyra said one evening, as they reviewed the mission plans. The holographic map of the Enshrouded stronghold glowed before them, a stark reminder of the enemy's reach. Malachor's fortress is heavily guarded. Getting in won't be easy, and we don't have the firepower of the Enshrouded behind us. We'll have to rely on stealth, surprise, and precision. Kael nodded, studying the map. Lyra was right. The Enshrouded fortress was located on a remote planet, deep in a system controlled by the enemy. If they could infiltrate it undetected, they would have the element of surprise on their side. But even as he thought about the plan, Kael couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The Enshrouded had been manipulating the galaxy for centuries. They wouldn't let the resistance get this close without preparing a counterstrike. "Do we know where Malachor will be?" Kael asked, his voice steady. Lyra turned to him, her expression intense. "We believe he'll be in the control room during this strike. That's where the most sensitive information is stored. We need to get to him before he has a chance to activate the fortress's defenses." Kael's mind raced with possibilities. They would have to be quick, precise, and ruthless. If they could take out Malachor, they might be able to cripple the Enshrouded's ability to respond to the resistance. But if they failed, well, failure wasn't an option. "We'll need to move fast and hit hard," Kael said, determination in his voice. "Get in, get Malachor, and get out before the Enshrouded can retaliate." Lyra smiled, a glimmer of respect in her eyes. Exactly. The next few days were a blur of final preparations. Kael and the resistance worked tirelessly, gathering intel, coordinating the strike, and readying their team for the mission. Every soldier, every member of the resistance knew the risks. But they were ready. The fight for the galaxy's future was worth the sacrifice. The day of the mission arrived as Kael and Lyra boarded the ship that would carry them to the planet. Kael felt a sense of urgency in his chest. This wasn't just another mission. This was the turning point. If they succeeded, the resistance would have a real chance at defeating the Enshrouded. If they failed, the consequences would be catastrophic. The journey to the Enshrouded stronghold took several hours, the tension thick. In the air, Kael stood beside Lyra in the cargo hold, the sound of the ship's engines thrumming beneath their feet. The rest of the team was prepping their equipment, checking their weapons, and preparing for the worst. Kael couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as he looked around. These weren't just soldiers, these were people who had chosen to fight, who had chosen to stand against the darkness. He had found something in them that he had never seen in the military. They weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for hope, for a future where peace was possible. "We're almost there," Lyra said, breaking Kael's thoughts. He turned to her, his gaze meeting hers. "We'll make it. We have to." Lyra nodded, but Kael could see the worry in her eyes. She was strong, but even she couldn't shake the weight of the mission. If they failed, everything they had fought for would be lost. The ship landed on the surface of the planet, the atmosphere thick and heavy. The enshrouded stronghold loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the sky. It was an imposing structure, built into the side of a mountain and guarded by countless soldiers and automated defense systems. But Kael wasn't worried. Not anymore. The resistance had come too far to turn back now. They made their way toward the stronghold, moving through the dense terrain under the cover of darkness. The team was silent, their movements practiced and precise. Kael's heart beat loudly in his chest, but his mind was focused. They were so close. Just a few more steps, and they would have their shot at Malak or Dot as they approached the gates. The team's leader, a quiet but fierce woman named Aris, signaled for them to stop. "We're in," she whispered. "No turning back now." Kael nodded. They had trained for this. They knew the risks. But now it was all or nothing. The team breached the stronghold's outer defenses with swift precision, taking out the guards silently. They moved through the halls, a shadow in the night, until they reached the central control room. Kael felt a surge of adrenaline as they neared their target. The door to the control room was heavily reinforced, but the resistance had come prepared. Kael's heart pounded as one of the team members worked to disable the lock. Time seemed to stretch as they waited. Finally, the door slid open. There he was, Malakar. Kael's grip tightened on his weapon. This was it. The door to the control room slid open, and Kael's breath caught in his throat. There, standing at the far end of the room, was Malakar, the leader of the Enshrouded, the man who had orchestrated so much suffering across the galaxy. Kael felt his hands tighten around his weapon. This was it. The moment he had been fighting for. Malakar didn't even flinch as they entered. He stood, watching them with cold, calculating eyes, as though he had been expecting them all along. The tension in the room was palpable. Kael's heart pounded in his chest, his pulse a steady thrum in his ears. But as he looked over at Lyra, who stood beside him, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had come too far to stop now. "You should not have come here." Malakar's voice was low, a mocking drawl that seemed to echo off the walls. "You cannot win, Kael. Your rebellion is nothing more than a flicker in the darkness. And when I'm done with you, it will be snuffed out." Kael didn't respond. There was no point in wasting words. This wasn't about talking. This was about action. He had fought too hard to let Malakar's twisted vision take root in the galaxy any longer. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes locked on Malakar with a fierce intensity. "We've already won, Malakar. You've lost. This galaxy is not yours to control anymore." Malakar's smile never wavered, but Kael could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He had underestimated them. Underestimated the strength of their unity, their will to fight for something better. The Enshrouded had relied on fear, on manipulation. But now, the resistance was fighting not just for survival, but for hope. "You may have won a small battle," Malakar sneered, "but the war is far from over. You think you can defeat me, defeat the Enshrouded with your little resistance?" He shook his head. "You're wrong." Kael's hand hovered near his weapon. The time for words was over. They had to end this. The future of the galaxy depended on it. "Do it," Lyra whispered to Kael. Her voice was steady, but Kael could hear the weight behind it. This was their moment. If they failed, the galaxy would be doomed. With a sharp nod, Kael pulled the trigger. A single shot rang out, hitting Malakar square in the chest. The shock of the impact sent him staggering back, his face contorted in disbelief. He fell to his knees, looking up at them as if he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. For a brief moment, everything seemed to stand still. The Enshrouded leader, who had been a force of destruction and fear, was now crumpled on the floor, his life slowly ebbing away. Lyra stood there, her eyes hard but resolute. She had seen what this man had done, seen the pain and suffering he had caused. And now it was over. But even as Malakar's life ended, Kael knew this was only one part of the war. The Enshrouded were vast, their influence deep. But with Melikor's fall, the Resistance had dealt a blow that would echo throughout the galaxy. Kael stepped forward, looking down at the fallen leader. He hadn't done this for revenge. He had done it for the galaxy. For Lyra, for the hope that they could make a difference. He had chosen to fight for a future where peace wasn't just a dream. "This is just the beginning," Kael said quietly, his eyes meeting Lyra's. "We've started something that can't be stopped." Lyra nodded, her voice firm. "They may have fallen, but we won't stop until we're free. The galaxy will stand united, or it will fall together." As the Resistance team flooded into the room, securing the stronghold and ensuring there were no other threats, Kael looked out the window at the vastness of space. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The Enshrouded's influence was widespread, and there would be many more battles to come. But with Lyra by his side, with the Resistance at his back, Kael felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a future where people could live without fear. They were fighting for the galaxy. And Kael knew that together they would win.